check and see if I'm on. For anybody watching, this is Ramsey Dewey over here in Shanghai, China. Welcome to another edition of Q&A with the Coach Live. Here we go. Okay, we've got a couple people watching. Hello, it's Ramsey Dewey over here in Shanghai, China. Welcome to another edition of Q&A with the Coach Live. Please let me know if the audio is working. Can you hear me? Am I coming in clear? Please let me know in the comments if you can hear me, if I've got my audio set up correctly. Yes? You good? All right. Well, let's get started. If you are new to Q&A with the Coach, I'm Ramsey Dewey. I am a mixed martial arts coach based in Shanghai, China. And if you've got questions, I've got some answers for you. Just let me know in the comments and we will get started. It's not perfect. Oh man, what can we do to make it perfect? Let's see. If I can get closer to the microphone, which happens to be on my camera. Looks like I got disconnected there for a second. Looks like I'm back. Yeah. If you are a human of any size, you can learn how to fight. What is the fastest and safest way to condition for leg? Kick a heavy bag. Kick a heavy bag 100 times a day. And do that consistently for many years. You'll be fine. A lot of people are terrified of throwing leg kicks because of the notoriety of some recent UFC events where fighters have broken their legs. And they think, oh, I don't want that to happen to me. Well, pretty simply condition your legs, kick the bag 100 times a day. But more importantly, even more important than the leg conditioning, set up your leg kicks. If you don't want damage, then yeah, man, set up your leg kicks. That can be something as simple as throw something up high before you hit them down low. Yeah, if there's some lag, there's a simple reason for that. Activity issues here. Hopefully we're back. All right, Vascular Potato wants to know. A lot of people say big arms are bad for boxing. I'm a flyweight. Is it okay if I do bicep curls just because I'd like to? Yeah, there's nothing wrong. Bicep curls is not going to hamper your boxing. Now, if you look at someone like, say, a competition bodybuilder, and bodybuilding is their sport, and all they do is bodybuilding, without any other athletic movement besides lifting those weights and posing and trying to look good in front of an audience while they're flexing and posing, you're not going to be conditioned to move athletically for boxing. But if you're a boxer and you train for the sport of boxing and you do some, guess what? You're going to be fine. Nothing wrong with that. I remember Bill Wallace, kickboxer Bill Wallace, gave this talk about lifting weights, and he wasn't super big into lifting weights, but he would always pick up a moderate set of dumbbells and do some curls and some shoulder presses and all these other basic lifts to feel a nice pump in his arms before training. He felt like that was something beneficial to him. So, long story short, if it gives you the result you want, that's the right way. What else do we have? Yuvraj Singh says, I'm 20 years old, I'm 6'1", I'm also a bit overweight. Do you think it's possible for me to compete in boxing? All things are possible, my friend. Being overweight, it is very easy to think of that as something permanent. It's not. Body size, body composition is temporary. It's absolutely temporary, and that is changeable. It's very, very changeable. So if you're overweight, you know what? And you want to change that? You can. You can. There's this thing called getting out there and training that can change your life. The most important part, be consistent, right? It's not about cramming for a fight. Do a little bit, do a little bit more, do a little bit more, and make sure you are consistent. And you're going to see some results. And you'll get to that point where there will be no question in your mind about whether or not you can compete, because you're going to want to and you're going to do it. Luis Enrique, he says, I've been a great inspiration. Thank you, sir. I have my first kickboxing match in 50 days. Do you have any advice to manage anxiety and fear? Love from Paraguay. Okay. Anxiety and fear. Accept the fact that it's normal to be afraid and to experience anxiety and fear before you get into a fight. A question I get a lot is, can I be an MMA coach without actually having competed? And you can, but the big advantage of having competed is that you understand the fear and the anxiety. Even if you've only done it once, you understand the fear and the anxiety, because this is one of the most important parts of coaching, is helping the fighters to manage that. Not to overcome it, because you can't. You're always going to feel it. If you do not experience the fear and the anxiety, you don't know what you're getting into. So the fact that you're going into that first kickboxing match, understanding that there is a reason to fear, there is a reason to feel anxiety. This is a potentially dangerous thing. There's going to be another guy in there who's probably training just as hard as you, who's just as physically capable as you, and he's going to try to win just as hard as you are. And that's a reflection of what you're capable of. Did you know that? That fear isn't, oh, what if this other guy's tougher than me? It's, what if this other guy is as tough as me? What if this other guy has put in the work that I put in? Oh man, that should be a scary thing, and that should be a testament of your training, my friend. So that fear, if you think about it, is a testament of your training. Accept the fact that you are going to die. Not in the ring. I mean, it's a possibility, but very few people die in the ring. But accept the fact that you are mortal. One day, you will leave this mortal coil. Understand that. And accept that. Don't try to overcome it, accept it. So if we fear fighting, if we're scared of fighting, and we're able to see the big picture, I think it makes it a little bit easier. But yeah, accept the fact that fear is okay. That'll go a long way, my friend. Good luck in that fight. Stay strong, stay aggressive, hands raised at the end. Let me know how it goes. How much striking can you learn online? You know, if you had asked me about 7 years ago, I would have told you, meh, probably not that much. I had a student from Ukraine, this guy named Alexi, and he went back to his home country for a while, and he didn't have any gyms to train at in his hometown. And then about 6 months later, he came back to China and started training with me again, and his boxing had improved by leaps and bounds. And I said, where were you training? He said, I watched videos on the internet, and I trained by myself. And I said, wow, this is unprecedented progress, my friend. That's kind of amazing. So what made Alexi improve so much in those 6 months? Watching videos, training by himself, I'll tell you, the power of consistency. It's not enough just to watch the videos, you actually have to train. You gotta get up and do the work yourself. If you get up and do the work yourself, if you take your own initiative, that goes a very long way. But if you simply watch a video, let's say you want to learn a technique like, say, the triangle choke. By the way, I got a series of videos about triangle chokes and how to do them in many, many different ways from many, many different positions with many, many different setups coming out. Maybe you want to learn the triangle choke, and so you think, I'm going to watch the coach's video on triangle chokes, and you're like, aha, I know it now. You know it up here a little bit. You'll probably forget it tomorrow. but you don't know it in here, in your body. So, what do you have to do if you want to learn the triangle choke? Well, you get some training partners, you get on the mat, and you practice doing it until you know it in here, not just here. So, if you're going to learn from the internet, you got to put that stuff to the test. Sounds pretty simple, but it's shocking how many heads that goes over. All right, what other questions do we have? Simple question. For $1 million, would I take an uppercut from a prime Mike Tyson? I've taken much worse punches for a lot less. Man. My last professional fight, the prize for the winner was 1,000,000 Chinese yuan. That's an exchange rate 6.4 US dollars per RMB. So it was several $100,000 US dollars prize. The loser got $1,000. And I got my skull cracked open with a single punch. And I got $1,000 as a consolation prize. So would I take a single punch from Mike Tyson in his prime for $1 million? Dude, that's a silly question. That is a silly question to ask any professional fighter who's ever stepped in the cage or in the ring and competed against anybody for a piddly amount of cash, like $50. Man, my first pro fight paid me $50. 50. Count them. And every dollar of that money went to stitching this ear back on because it got ripped off. And my next fight paid me $50, and then the next one paid me $100, and the biggest paycheck I got in the US was like, it was somewhere about $350 US dollars, including the win bonus. And yeah, man, when I started fighting in China and Southeast Asia and Mongolia and all these other Asian countries, the paychecks went up a lot. I think for some reason there's just a bigger appreciation of combat sports athletes in Asia than there was in the US, at least at that time. But still, man, nowhere near the $1 million paycheck for a single punch in that hypothetical question. You know, for a person who's never stepped in a cage before, somebody who's never been in a fight before, it might seem like the end of the world if you get punched in the face by a big, strong guy like Mike Tyson. And you might think, I don't know if that's worth $1 million. But if you've ever fought before for any amount of money, that's man, that would be cake. Even if you got knocked out, you'd wake up a millionaire. Nothing new right there. Anyway, I've pontificated about that quite a bit. How can you get an amateur fight without being affiliated with a gym or a coach? I'm not telling you that you should, but you certainly can. And it is as simple as contact the promoter that puts on the fights and ask them what they're looking for. A lot of fight promoters are looking for literally anybody willing to step in the ring or step in the cage to fight. And some of them are looking for talent. So contact the promoter if you want to fight. That guy wants to know, hey, how do you have faith if you don't feel results, especially while training alone using body weight? Okay, faith in your training? If you don't feel the results, if it's not giving you the results that you want, it's probably not the right way. Remember what I said before, if it gives you the results you want, that's the right way, and the opposite is also true. That being said, improvement takes time, and time takes patience. I finally talked my wife into training with me. Not martial arts training, but physical training, like going to the gym and lifting weights. And we've been lifting weights together for a while, and she said something the other day which was interesting, which is, man, this takes a lot of time to see marginal improvements. To see tiny little improvements, we have to put in so much work. And I'm like, yep, exactly. Getting strong is a process. And just like faith, but that faith requires patience. Patience the process through to the end. Because if you're an impatient person, you're not going to get very far with physical training of any kind. Man, especially strength training. How many guys have you seen? Maybe you are one of those guys. You go to the gym, you do some exercise, you do some curls, you do your bench press, then you go to the mirror and you flex to see how much your muscles have grown in the last 3 seconds. Which is silly because your muscles don't grow while you exercise. You might get a little pump on there, get some blood into your muscles, make them look a little bit bigger, but they're not going to grow there at gym. They're going to grow overnight while you sleep, tiny, tiny little increments at a time. And maybe several years later, you can see some notable differences if you compare a before and after picture. But when the changes are very small and very slow, they seem imperceptible. So exercise patience as much as you can, my friend. Hussein Haroon wants to know, how can I make Taekwondo effective in MMA and kickboxing? Very simple. Learn all the other aspects of MMA and kickboxing. So if you are a Taekwondo practitioner and you want to kickbox, learn how to box, learn how to kickbox. Sounds like a no-brainer, right? But yeah. Same thing with MMA. Learn all the other aspects of MMA. Learn how to wrestle, learn jiu-jitsu, learn boxing, learn kickboxing, learn clinch fighting. Learn how to string all that stuff together. And that Taekwondo background will work to augment all those other skill sets. Michael wants to know if I'm sure I pronounced Shanghai correctly. Yeah, it's pronounced Shanghai. It's how you say it in Chinese. Shanghai. Yuvraj Singh wants to know, I've recorded some of my heavy bag workout. Would you watch it and give me some pointers on it? I get a lot of questions about this, and some people have sent me videos of them heavy bag work, and that's fine. I'll be happy to give you a couple pointers on it, but there's only so much that I'll be able to know based on heavy bag work, for the simple reason that working with a heavy bag is a very different thing than fighting. And that's going to give me very different information than, say, a sparring session. And that's fine, because maybe you're just wanting to know, are my body mechanics fine for my punching, or am I doing something stupid? I have no clue what I'm doing. That's fine. Send me a video of your heavy bag work. You can email me at ramseydewey@gmail.com, or send me a link to a YouTube video you have up there. I'll be happy to take a look at it. But heavy bag work, there's only so much I'll be able to know about what you're capable of. Bobo Bip wants to know, are Muay Thai clinches and throws more applicable than BJJ throws in MMA? Huh. You know, there are a lot of great Muay Thai techniques, sweeps, throws, leg catches, etc. that can be used in mixed martial arts and are used in mixed martial arts, and they're all useful. And BJJ throws, that's kind of a funny statement. The overwhelming majority of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu classes never actually teach takedowns or throws or practice them in class, but generally when people say BJJ throws, they're talking about, basic wrestling, single legs, double legs, basic judo throws, etc. It's all good. I mean, it's all good. If you want a Muay Thai sweep to be more applicable to mixed martial arts, what you've got to do is follow them down to the ground and control them. Because a big problem with Muay Thai style sweeps for MMA is that you can sweep the guy, get some style points, but if you don't control the guy on the ground, it does you no good at all. If the guy can just pop right back up again, that does you no good. If you look at scoring criteria in mixed martial arts, for example, you're only going to score for a takedown if you keep the guy on the ground. If you sweep the guy and he pops right back up, the judges are advised to ignore that. Regardless of what type of throw it is, whether you do a cool judo hip throw, a double leg, a single leg, a Muay Thai style sweep, whatever, if the guy pops right back up again, it's pretty worthless. Why do we take people down in an MMA fight? We take them down so we can control them more efficiently on the ground. So we can take away all the variables that they have in the stand-up game, so we can take away the power they have in the stand-up game and impose our will more efficiently by pinning them on the ground and then either finishing them with strikes or a submission. What did I think about Ryan Hall getting knocked out after spamming his Imanari roll in his last fight? I only saw a couple of clips from that fight, and a lot of people were talking about it. Made me kind of sad. I like Ryan Hall. I wanted to see him win. I'm a fan of his. But at the same time, I thought, man, Ryan Hall really, really needed a plan B in that fight. The Imanari roll, it's a great move. Love it. I use it. But if that's all you have, you're going to lose once you run into the guy who knows how to deal with that situation. Your game plan doesn't have to be complicated, but just like the great Marcelo Garcia taught, you need a good plan A and a good complementary plan B. At the same time, it's really easy to say, oh, Ryan Hall should have just done this or just done that. How many of you have actually been in a cage fight before? And you have this idea, like, I'm going to shoot in, I'm going to take him down, I'm going to get on top and work for a submission, or I'm going to do my Imanari roll and get a hook. And then you take a punch, and suddenly the lights go out, and you see flashes of light stars in front of you. You don't know what's going on for a while. You come to a second later, and the guy's pounced on you, or he's hit you again, and you're discombobulated. And you are completely unable to process anything that isn't already in your muscle memory. Then you start going on autopilot. That's kind of how a fight works. We have all these plans, like I've got my plan A, I've got my plan B, but ultimately, most of us just end up going on autopilot, doing what we do best. And so it's no surprise that, Ryan Hall, when the going got tough, he did what he did best. You can't fault a man for that. And yeah, just like Mr. Singh says, Ryan Hall is a great fighter regardless. Oh, we got a super chat. Let's check this out. Which is better for staying safe? This is from EMPDDD. Which is better for staying safe from street violence? If you had to pick only one, looking really dangerous, but being unskilled, or being really skilled, but looking very unintimidating, think bodybuilder versus Chase Hooper. Okay, I don't know who Chase Hooper is, but I'm guessing he's kind of the antithesis of a bodybuilder. This is a great question, man. I've known a number of people who worked in personal protective services. What's another word for that? Bodyguards. Yeah, I knew a professional bodyguard, and this guy was big, strong, intimidating. He looked the part. He had the big muscles. He looked like the type of guy you didn't want to mess with. And he knew how to fight a little bit, but not an expert in hand-to-hand combat, but he was so big and so strong, people just didn't want to mess with him. And I asked him a lot of questions about the bodyguarding industry, and he said, it's good to know a couple of fighting moves, but it's more important to look the part. Because if you're a black belt in every fighting style and you're the most badass guy on the planet, but you look like a wimp, people are going to mess with you. People are going to approach you. People are going to do things that your client does not want, to bring attention to that situation that he doesn't want. People hiring a bodyguard don't want to see fights breaking out. There's this picture of Floyd Mayweather on the internet walking around with his bodyguards, and Floyd is he's a tough dude. He knows how to fight. We've seen that again and again, but obviously Floyd doesn't fight for free, man. So what does he do? He hires these big, strong bodybuilders, and did I say bodybuilders? Bodyguards. And they're just giant, like 400 pound men that surround him like a wall of flesh. And you look at that and you're like, no way I'm getting through that wall of giant humans without mechanical assistance. And even then, you don't want to mess with that. So honestly, I think looking the part, being big, intimidating, and strong looking is probably a better deterrent. At the same time, you're going to run into some folks with the Napoleon complex. If you don't know what that is, it's guys who get off on the idea of beating up bigger, stronger looking people. I mean, think about Charlie Zelenoff, for example. This dude has a major Napoleon complex. You may have seen his videos where he goes into gyms and convinces, guys with big muscle to put on some boxing gloves, and then he sucker punches them, and yeah, that turned into a whole internet mess. But yeah, that's an example of a guy who sought out big, strong guys who didn't necessarily know how to fight. There are psychopaths like that. So is bodybuilding the way to go if you want to be a bodyguard? Yeah, basically. As far as physical appearance, yeah, get big, get strong, look the part, if that's the type of work you want to go into. Is it normal for some martial arts schools to have scheduled sparring sessions on certain days of the week? Yeah, that's pretty normal. It's not unheard of, man. Some schools will have a sparring session at the end of every class. Some will say we're doing sparring on Tuesdays and Fridays and Saturdays at this time and this time and this time. Yep, that's pretty normal. Okay. Our friend, I'm going to mispronounce your name. It looks like Shreya Singh. Last name Singh. Anyway, wants to know, I don't have pro fighting experience, but I want to start a gym. Plus, I'm 21, so people may not take me seriously. What are your thoughts? I have 9 years of experience, but that's about it. Well, experience in martial arts and experience running a gym are radically different things. So it's important not to get those confused. To get taken seriously as somebody who owns a gym, get experience owning and running a gym. That's about it. And you're probably going to do everything wrong for the first few years. And that's okay. It's part of the learning process. There are a lot of groups that cater specifically toward helping gym owners to do a better job at running their gyms. There's a Facebook group I belong to. I don't check Facebook much anymore, but it's called something like Gym Owners. And the whole point of the group is collaborations between gym owners sharing their experience to help them to run their businesses better. So it's very important to understand that running a gym is a business. And a lot of people who love martial arts and they love training and they love fighting think, oh, I'm going to run a gym, I'm going to own a gym, and then, that's just going to make it all better. And then they realize they're not actually in love with running a business. And that's a whole different can of worms, man. It's a whole different thing. So it's not just about having people take you seriously, it's about you taking yourself seriously as a business person. So very different thing. All right, we got a super chat from Sammy. Sammy wants to know, hey coach, how are you? I'm doing well, man. That was an easy super chat question. Are there any upcoming fights that you're excited to see? Huh. Man. I don't even know what upcoming fights there are, but I'm excited to see them. Sorry if that doesn't sound like a great question. Or a great answer to your question, but off the top of my head, I can't think of any particular fight that I'm more excited to see than the others. But thank you so much for your super chat, my friend. Okay, we've got another one from a Broom, who sent in a super chat. Have I seen Karate Combat yet? If so, what do I think of it? I have seen it. I've seen a little bit. I have yet to watch an entire Karate Combat event, but I've seen a couple of the fights that have been released online, and it's fun to watch. It's interesting. I don't know what the rules are yet. I haven't looked up the rules. So if you guys could tell me, like, what are the rule differences in Karate Combat versus kickboxing? I noticed in some of the fights they had a takedown, for example. And you'll see this in some karate tournaments. They allow a takedown and a strike on the ground, then they stand them back up. But I'm not sure what the specific rules are in Karate Combat. So whenever I understand a combat sport, the first thing I look at is the rules, but I haven't looked those up yet. So yeah, it's a fun sport to watch, and I think that's specifically because of the rules that encourage the fighters to use specific techniques. I just don't know what those rules are yet. Takedown and ground and pound for 5 seconds. Okay, interesting. All right, what else do we have? Kemal Yilmaz. Are you from Turkey? Sounds like a Turkish name. Sorry if I've got that wrong, but Kemal wants to know, hey coach, how are you? My question is, should I cut weight for my first Muay Thai fight, or should I fight on my walk-around weight? I'm 15 on 170 pounds. Okay, that depends. If I would recommend first fight, cut as little weight as possible. Ah, you are from Turkey. I got a friend from Turkey named Kemal. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, but yeah. A lot of tough fighters from Turkey. A lot of them. A lot of them have come over here to Shanghai to compete and to coach. Interesting culture, those folks from Turkey. Anyway, I would recommend for your first fight, cut as little weight as possible. If you do a big weight cut for your first fight, this is going to introduce a lot of unknown variables, things that you're not used to. So again, cut as little weight as you can for your first fight. If there's a difference of like 5 pounds, something like that, okay, you can sweat that off. You can spit in a bucket and make weight easily without having it affect you. But if you got to go down like a whole weight class, or worse, 2 weight classes, something like that, it's better to stick close to your walking around weight. Now, if you have a lot of experience cutting weight and you understand how you move, how you perform after doing a weight cut, that's a different thing. But if it's your first time, make that weight cut as minimal as possible. Okay, we got a super chat from EMPDDD again, who says, they say styles make fights. Do you think the current UFC champs would still be champs if there were no gloves or wraps allowed? Ooh, that's a great question. I think the titles would change around quite a bit, actually. If there were no gloves and no wraps, grappling would suddenly become much more important in mixed martial arts than it currently is. The boxing traditions that the New Jersey State Athletic Control Board introduced to the sport of MMA when they penned the unified rules, such as gloves and wraps and rounds, etc., etc. All these are boxing traditions that they brought into the sport of MMA. This changed the game. Before that, mixed martial arts was dominated by grapplers, primarily smothering the strikers. And one of those reasons was no gloves and no wraps, and so you had to be really careful about placing your punches. Fairly analogous to boxing back in the olden days, 120 years ago, when they were still bare-knuckle fights. And Grappling was still heavily encouraged, meaning the fighters were allowed to clinch and strike, and you didn't get a penalty for holding. It wasn't called dirty boxing, it was just boxing, right? But at the same time, they were very careful. You didn't see wild, crazy flurries of punches. You saw carefully placed punches. You saw lots of hand fighting and trapping, moving those pesky arms and elbows out of the way to land that punch that would connect flush, okay? So if they took the gloves out of the equation, then absolutely superior grappling and superior clinch fighting would become the deciding factor in the UFC. And if they took the rounds out, I'm gonna expound upon this. If they took the rounds out, even more so. Rounds favor strikers in a big way. Think about this. How many fights have you seen where round one, the wrestler got top position, maybe he worked into full mount, he starts landing strikes, and he gets a few strikes off, then the bell rings, and then they have to reset the action back up on the feet. Whereas if the fight was allowed to continue for just a few more seconds in that mounted position, it would have been all over. And then the striker, who was just mounted, who was just losing that fight, gets this Rocky-like comeback in round two where he gets that lucky punch. If we got rid of the rounds, we would get rid of that situation entirely. And we'd make the sport a lot more honest. And the people that argue against this, that argue against the gloves, the rounds, etc., or I should say taking those things away, say, well, if you look at the early days of the UFC, those fights were boring and they sucked, blah, blah, blah. Well, here's the thing about the early days of the UFC. You had fighters who didn't know how to fight, basically. Let me amend that. You had one-dimensional fighters who knew how to fight in one dimension. I would love to see UFC 1 rules with modern MMA fighters. I think that would be amazing. All right, we got another super chat from some guy who says, I'm a big fan of yours, some guy. I am 135 pounds, a one-stripe blue belt, and at other gyms and BJJ competitions, I get smashed by blue belts and above. I feel like I'm not worthy of my belt. Advice. My advice to you, that's a good question. That's a good question. And it's one of those problems with belts is that we tend to identify ourselves with a belt color, right? And we see what other people at that same belt color are doing or not doing, and we think I should be able to do that, or I'm better than that guy, so I should have that belt. And it creates certain problems, but number one, relax. Number two, keep breathing. And number three, you know what? Just try to be the guy on top. These are 3 rules for fighting that when people feel overwhelmed, I'll always repeat, relax, keep breathing, and when in doubt, be the guy on top, because then you're probably going to be winning. But there's more to this answer to you. So, you get smashed in competitions. Well, that's great. That means you're competing. And if you're competing, you're lapping the guys who are not competing. Man, if you look at people who compete in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu versus casuals who show up and they train at the gym, it's a different animal. If you look at, say, a competition purple belt versus a casual black belt, and then they go after it, how many times does the competition purple belt win? It happens fairly often. It's not uncommon. And you might be thinking, well, I go to other gyms and I get smashed. And a lot of that is the fact that you're not familiar with the style of these other guys at other gyms. Man, I've had experiences in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu going to other gyms because I visit other gyms a lot. And some gyms are absolute pushovers, and some gyms are absolute badasses, and then you got everything in between, right? You don't need to be comparing yourselves to those other guys, right? Thinking I'm better than the people in Gym A and not as good as the people at Gym B, and I don't feel worthy of this belt around my waist. Compare yourself to how you were yesterday, and the day before that, and the day before that. This is a paraphrasal of a famous quote by a man named Jigoro Kano, the founder of Judo, the progenitor art of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Don't compare yourself to other people, compare yourself to yesterday. Okay? If you are better than you were as a white belt, guess what? You earned that blue belt. And there's nothing wrong with that. And when your coach wraps a purple belt around your waist, and you might think, well, dang, I wasn't even done being a blue belt yet. Evaluate yourself this way. Am I better now as a purple belt than I was as a blue belt? Etc., etc., etc. Man. Had a discussion last night with my friend Carlos. He's a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And we were talking about Bruce Lee. And I'm going to get excommunicated from the Church of Jeet Kune Do again talking about this, but I will anyway. And we talked about Bruce Lee, and he said, I don't understand. Why is it that people are always saying Bruce Lee was the best martial artist of all time when he only trained for a few years? I've been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for 10 years, and I know nothing. Now that's Carlos being humble, because he's a very good grappler. He's very skilled. But he said, I've been doing jiu-jitsu for 10 years and I know nothing about jiu-jitsu, right? Because of course he's comparing himself with the coach who's a second-degree black belt from Brazil, who's just incredibly good, right? And compared to the coach, yeah, he gets his butt kicked, right? Compared to how he was as a purple belt, as a blue belt, as a white belt, man, he knows so much more. But when we start comparing ourselves to other people, like, am I as good as Bruce Lee? Am I better than Bruce Lee? Am I as good as that purple belt? Etc., etc. We run into problems. Compare yourself to yourself. Yesterday. That was kind of long-winded, but on with the questions. All right, our friend Mod of G has a question about starting a gym in India, and this is a question that interests me a lot because he says, here in India, most of the grappling coaches have the bare minimum of experience in BJJ, and very few of them are white belts. Basically, you got a lot of very inexperienced people running grappling gyms, right? Because grappling is very, very new in India. And I'll tell you what, from personal experience, when I came to China, it was the same thing here. There was very, very little instruction available in grappling. There were a couple of guys with blue belts in Shanghai at the time teaching. I think there was one guy up in Beijing with a blue belt. There were a few visiting black belts who came once in a while. But you know what? It got better. In the 12 years since I've been here in Shanghai, it went from almost nothing to actually quite a lot. And you know what? I have complete faith that the same thing can happen in India. But it all starts with those guys who know very little sharing what they know and improving upon it and doing everything that they can to, get more experienced people to come and help and teach. And sometimes that's as simple as consult the internet or, pay someone to come do a seminar over there in India. That can help a lot. And just keep doing it, keep grinding. And be honest about it. That's the most important part. Be honest about it. It is really, really easy in an environment like that to set up McDojos. So just be as honest as you can about it. And the growth and development of grappling and mixed martial arts in India will take off. But if we introduce elements of dishonesty, that's going to hold it back. So hold yourself, hold others accountable. Vascular Potato, man, that's a fascinating screen name. Wants to know, are some people naturally hard punchers? Two guys of equal weight and skill level, but one guy hits way harder. Yeah. Some people have a natural inclination to punch harder than others. Some people have a natural physiology that allows them to punch harder than others, but you know what? Training in correct punching mechanics, in correct body mechanics, allows you to improve upon whatever you can already do. So if you're a crappy puncher and you train in good punching mechanics, you can work your way up to a decent puncher. If you are already a heavy puncher without any training and then you train, boom, you got the touch of death. It's the amazing thing about training. It can make a bad man better and a good man superior. Tristan wants to know, do I have any tips and tricks for mixing karate and Muay Thai together? Probably the hardest part about mixing karate and Muay Thai together is the side stance. Knowing when and where and how to switch from a more open stance, we could call it a Muay Thai stance, to a side stance. So when and how and where to use side kicks and back kicks. I have a few videos on this topic. I've got a video called Stances, something like that, where I address the topic of switching very quickly from a side stance to a Muay Thai stance and back again. If you can do that, almost everything else about mixing karate and Muay Thai gets pretty simple. This is a fascinating question with a very simple answer. How do you know if you have knockout power without having been in a fight? You don't. You don't. But honestly, it doesn't take that much power to knock people out. It doesn't. People grossly overestimate the amount of power that it takes to knock somebody out. If you throw a nice stiff jab like that, I mean, that's not a super powered punch right there, but if you land it in the right spot at the right time, that's enough power to knock somebody out. All right, Ninja Knight wants to know, he hurt his shoulder from a Kimura. Tap sooner next time. But he wants to know what he should do in the meantime while he is recovering. Rehab, man, rehab. Rehab basically means do simple exercises that strengthen the area and the muscles around the injury without aggravating them. So it can be really simple things like getting a small rubber resistance band and doing some simple movements like that. Just really simple stuff, as long as it isn't aggravating the injury, to build up the muscles and over a long period of time get stronger. We got a super chat from Duquaticus Z. That sounds like a dinosaur. Duquaticus. The giant Duquaticus lumbered across the land, searching for leaves and stems from the tallest trees as it extended its... I'm doing my David Attenborough impression here, if he narrated dinosaur documentaries. Anyway, Duquaticus Z wants to know, what do you think would help BJJ become stronger in modern MMA? BJJ-based champions seem less common these days versus wrestling-based. I was about, if you want your Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to shine in mixed martial arts, learn how to wrestle. And learn how to wrestle in the context of mixed martial arts. Because if you can't get the takedown, you're going to run into problems. We were chatting about Ryan Hall before and how he ran into a specific problem. He's trying his Imanari roll over and over again, trying to get that heel hook, and it's not working out, right? And eventually he gets knocked out, which is unfortunate to see because I love Ryan Hall, right? But what if Ryan Hall, in addition to having this awesome ground game, had an awesome takedown game and had these unstoppable takedowns? Why did people rant and rave so much about Khabib, for example? Why? Because we got to see his ground game. Why did we get to see his ground game? Because his wrestling was on point, because he had that unstoppable takedown, because he invested so much time into taking his opponents down and controlling them so that he was able to impose his will. So how do you make your BJJ for MMA stronger? Improve your wrestling for MMA. Hope that helps. Wrestling should never be underestimated. The value of wrestling for MMA should never be underestimated. It's one of the most important things. If you have a guy who is an expert wrestler, a novice at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and a pretty good striker, versus a Jiu-Jitsu expert who knows nothing else about anything else, This guy over here is gonna stomp that guy over there probably 9 times out of 10 in an MMA fight. All right, we got another super chat from EMPDDD. Man, all these super chats from this friend of ours who says, what do you think is the most underutilized technique in MMA? I think it is the front leg side kick. It's the jab of kicks, but hardly anyone uses it. You haven't been watching Chinese MMA, man. Watch Chinese MMA fighters, they use the lead leg side kick constantly. Why? Because that's what Sanda fighters do, and most Chinese MMA fighters come from a Sanda background. And, man, I see this all the time in China, and in the West, we don't really see it. But man, that lead leg side kick, used correctly, is amazing. And I mean, you can say it's the jab of kicks, and yeah, but it also serves a lot of other purposes. It is a kick you can use, and here's one way the Chinese fighters use it. They use it in close range, which you wouldn't really think of as a jab of kicking, right? We get into close range. We're in the pocket. I throw a combination. I finish that combination leaning back into a side kick to the head, to the face. And it's a very common thing to see in Chinese MMA. It creates this space, it creates this distance, and then they swoop in and go under for the legs, going for a double leg or a single leg takedown. And it's a great strategy. It's a great strategy from Sanda that works very well in the sport of mixed martial arts. But a lot of people in the West have never seen it and they've never practiced it, and they don't have any faith in the thing working because, again, we can only exercise faith in what we already know. Did you know that? You can only see what you already know and what you already understand. So, for example, if you've never seen grappling before, you don't understand grappling, and then you watch an MMA fight, you're like, oh, why are they just hugging each other? This is boring. But if you understand grappling, you know how it works. You're like, hey, this is a technical grappling match. This is awesome, and I love it. Right? So we're only able to see what we think. So what are the most underutilized techniques in MMA? Well, in the West, you're definitely onto something with the lead leg side kick. There are many, many uses for that technique, and it's definitely heavily underutilized in Western mixed martial arts. But what else? Man, there are a lot of techniques that I think could be very high percentage if people just went for them more. I filmed a video last night in my ongoing series about all the triangle chokes where I covered the TP submission, also known as the Paulson. It's a variation of a triangle choke, and it's very rare to see this in mixed martial arts. My friend Suman Mokhtarian, he caught one of these in an MMA fight a few years ago. He's based in Australia, and it was a cool fight. He got a TP submission, and a lot of people are like, wow, look at this rare submission. I got one of those in a fight like 10 years ago. Dude named Dave Allred got one. Before that, my friend Daniel Grass, I think he got one of those. But it's a rare submission to see. And so people tend to think, it's a rare submission, therefore it must be a low percentage submission, when the reality is it's a really easy submission to do. If you get into a position to finish a triangle choke, you are also in position to finish a teepee. And as far as I can tell, it's no more difficult to finish than a triangle choke. In fact, in many cases, it's easier to finish than a triangle choke. But why don't we see it more often? Well, how many of you know the teepee? How many of you practice the teepee? How many of you regularly catch people with a teepee submission? Most of you probably not that often because it's not as popular to teach or to practice as a standard triangle choke. Does that mean it's lower percentage? Only in the numbers we've actually calculated from observable fights. All right, what else do we have? Do I play chess? Sometimes I play chess when my kids want to play chess with me. Funny thing is, my kids call the game chest instead of chess. They say, hey, Daddy, do you want to play chest with me? I'm like, sure, let's play chest. It always makes me laugh. Thoughts on the long guard and Muay Thai techniques for the sport of boxing? Okay, a long guard, Muay Thai long guard. I was teaching a Muay Thai class last night, specifically about the long guard and why we use it, and it's many uses for counter punching, for pushing, for framing, for moving directly into a clinch, for disengaging from a clinch, for dealing with kicks, knees, defensive, offensive options, etc. And a lot of those options go out the window when we limit ourselves to boxing. At the same time, it's not completely useless. There are practical applications for having a long guard in boxing. In fact, if you look at the traditional English boxing stance, where you lift the lead shoulder and invert the hands of the Muay Thai stance, check it out. It's basically the same thing with the same footwork. It's a counter-punching stance with a long guard. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking the English boxing stance is leaning back, because when we raise the lead shoulder to protect the chin, it's not the lead arm protecting the chin, it's the lead shoulder. It gives the illusion of leaning back when really it's just the lead shoulder raised to protect the chin. In the same way that if we move to a Philly shell, the lead shoulder is raised to protect the chin. So there are a lot of very practical applications of a long guard in boxing, but it's a counter-punching stance more than anything. If you're not a counter-puncher and you're trying to use a long guard, you're probably going to get smacked in the face a lot in the learning process. So learn your counter-punching first, learn how to counter with your cross, learn how to intercept with a check hook, and then that long guard can become very, very useful for you. At the same time, there's no reason to get married to any single stance in a fight. It is very important, in my opinion, to flow from one stance to the other, depending on your position, your proximity to the other guy, etc., etc. How to beat somebody who uses a Philly shell in the street? Well, first of all, don't get into street fights, but speaking of the Philly shell, the big weakness of the Philly shell is an overhand. And a big misconception about an overhand is that it's a swing. It's not, it's a punch. Do you know the difference between a swing and a punch? A punch is a straight line. It is your hand essentially moving from here, boom, to here. Whether it is a shovel hook, an uppercut, a jab, a cross, etc., etc., right? And it's the same with the overhand. The overhand, we're going to move the arm forward and then down and then make that fist and pump that little punch forward the last couple of inches. But the overhand is the kryptonite of the Philly shell, specifically because if I'm in a Philly shell, I've got the shoulder up here, and if somebody's punching at my chin, at my head, this is going to mitigate most of those strikes, right? I'm going to be able to roll with that, etc. But there's this little space up here that a straight punch can't get over, but an overhand will. So, if you're having troubles with somebody shelling up on you, put some stock in your overhand right. All right, we got a super chat from Equationist who says, standing grapples are a common feature of police training and self-defense arts, for example, HEMA, traditional jiu-jitsu. If I trained in sparring, could they be viable in MMA? I've only seen Aoki's arm yank. Okay. Yeah, I know what you mean, like those traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu, aikido style standing grappling submission type of things. That stuff is difficult to pull off for a couple of reasons. One, finishing a guy, controlling and submitting somebody, getting them to give up, right, via submission, via an arm lock, a leg lock, a choke, etc., is infinitely easier when you have him pinned on the ground. Okay? It is possible. There are certain wrist locks that I use quite a bit, actually, but they're much, much easier to pull off on the ground when the guy is pinned already. So you mentioned Aoki's arm yank. John Jones did a similar technique once where he overhooks the guy and cranks. Didn't finish the fight, but it certainly hurt his opponent. That stuff is tough to do because when the guy has his feet under him, when he can move around, it's difficult to control him, right? Every time I've heard someone say, well, my Aikido works, my traditional Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, arm control, arm standing submission stuff works, it's generally a situation like this. They end up in a combative situation with a smaller, less skilled combatant. And they get to a point in the fight of submission, not tapping out, but let me clarify that. There's several phases to almost every violent altercation. There is an escalation, right? There is posturing. Posturing is where we puff our chest out, figuratively or literally, and try to win the fight without fighting. We say, look at me, look at my weapons, I'm big and strong and tough, don't mess with me, right? And if the posturing fails, we tend to move into the actual stage of combat, or we run from the combat, or we submit and say, hey, I'm done, right? So in these situations where the Aikido guy manages to subdue the combative assailant or whatever with the wrist lock, it's generally the guy kind of gives up on the idea of fighting. You're bigger, you're stronger, you're the bouncer at this club. Okay, I'm done, I give up, right? So we see this a lot with police, because what do police do? They, at least in America, they pull out their guns and say, get on the ground, put your hands behind your head, get on the car, let me restrain you. And then they'll put that arm lock on you or whatever, then put you in the handcuffs. That's a very different thing than just going in there hand to hand with a wild, crazy guy swinging at you, or having a knife or a broken glass bottle or something. Just lock him on the fly. That doesn't work so well. But in short, if you want your technique to work, yeah, practice it, and practice it a lot. Oh, we got a super chat from Leb Stark, the kettlebell guy. He says, brother, I've already sent you 2 emails for the podcast. I'm sorry I haven't gotten back to you. I've been meaning to do a podcast with this guy for a while. He's got an awesome channel on kettlebells, kettlebell training, etc. So yes, I'm going to email you back right after this, and we're going to set up this podcast. It's going to be great. I'm excited to do it. So thank you so much for the reminder, and thank you for the super chat. Go check out Leb Stark kettlebell channel. Awesome stuff, especially if you're interested in technique. All right, we got time for maybe one more question, so I'm glad that one came in before I had to wrap this up. All right, Tristan has one more question. He says, how do I think MMA would change hypothetically if it was truly a no rules sport? For example, if everything was allowed, eye gouging, biting, groin shots, etc. I made a whole video about this, and a long story short about it is you'd have a lot less people interested in competing in MMA. You wouldn't have the high-level athletes interested in competing in MMA. And you'd have a handful of psychopaths interested in competing in MMA. Would that make it more interesting? No, we'd see a bunch of bum fights, to be honest. Rules do a lot more than make the sport safer to compete in. They make the sport more interesting to watch in a lot of ways. Think about the introduction of gloves in the sport of boxing. We think that was to make the sport safer for the fighters, and to some extent, gloves help prevent injuries to the hands. But what did preventing injury to the hands do? It made boxing a lot more exciting to watch, because fighters with broken hands don't throw punches, and fighters who don't throw punches aren't exciting boxers to watch, and those fights end, and then it's not fun to watch a boxing match that doesn't exist, right? So you put the gloves on, you don't injure the hands as much, you can throw more punches. Yeah, it's totally a weapon. Henry, you're absolutely right. And so the sport of boxing got a lot more exciting. Not safer, more exciting. So you add a few simple rules like don't eye gouge the other guy. Is an eye gouge fun to watch? If I put up a video of an eye gouge on YouTube, my channel would get pulled down immediately, because YouTube censors that stuff, man. So MMA would have a very, very small audience. You probably wouldn't even know what it is. It would have been banned a long time ago. So yeah, man, MMA would be relegated to secret underground bum fights with very low-level athletes. And Captain Krav Maga would be the undisputed UFC champion of the world. Yes, Richard Gomez, you are correct. All right, guys, that's all the time I have today for this live chat. Thank you so much for watching. Now get out there and train.